So we've addressed how this so-called transition from analog to digital isn't necessarily a wholesale replacement of analog technology. In fact, we can't completely replace analog technology. And we'll cover that more toward the end of this chapter. But it's also not a transition with one particular cutoff date. And so the author points out that this was really a multifaceted transition. You may remember in 2009 when in the United States there was a cutoff date to switch from analog television broadcasts over the air to digital. That was a logistical necessity, and that was the deadline, and everyone had to switch before that deadline if they wanted to take advantage of the new digital broadcasts. In audio and in all of the world and ways that analog and digital technology can be used, there was no such governing body, so it was it's best to call it a multifaceted transition. And so ever since the development of the computer and other developments in World War II and the economic boom that we've talked about, there was signal processing developing in the digital realm. Mass-marketed video games in the 1980s played their role on the consumer end. The compact disc was introduced in 1982, the first commercial consumer end medium for digital audio. All of these contributed to this gradual and multifaceted shift from analog to digital. So remember what we said about this transistor. It's small and increasingly smaller. And there was this post-war economic boom that we mentioned in previous chapters. I just alluded to. As a result of increased war research during the Second World War, economic activity that saw a boost after the war. The invention of these smaller electronic components like the transistor enabled amateur and entrepreneurial experimenters to experiment with analog music making. This was something that just wasn't feasible before. You had to look like a lot more of a mad scientist before this post-war era. In the post-war era, since World War II, you looked like more of a hobby shop enthusiast, maybe a Radio Shack customer or similar stores that were selling those kinds of components. This miniaturization is something that is described in a phenomenon called Moore's Law, where in 1965, Moore predicted that the use of transistors was going to double every year. So if it's twice as much the next year, 4 times that many the following year, 8 times as many that following year. This is an exponential increase in use, and so that's what we're seeing in computer processors, or at least what we have seen until recent plateaus. But the increase in the number of transistors that can fit on a processor. These transistors we're able to get them smaller and smaller, so they're microscopic, and they're able to store more and more and process more and more information. So that highlights the other benefit of a transistor, and you can actually do this with a very simple circuit, but it's the thing that makes digital electronics possible. There's a circuit that's demonstrated in this next video. Just watch a little bit of it. You don't have to get into the electrical explanation unless you're really interested in that. But it's showing a circuit called a flip-flop. And the cool thing about this is that we're just using 2 transistors, and it's basically a switch that's controlling another switch. But when we have this particular setup, we're able to make a situation last without us forcing it to happen. We can put the machine into a certain state and leave it there. That means if we say, like when we were setting up our telegraph, when I beep once it means this, and when I beep twice it means this. Well, we have one light that can light up, or the other light that can light up, the flip or the flop in a flip-flop circuit. And we could say, well, when this is lit up, it means this. When this is lit up, it means this. It's a simple yes or no question. and it stays that way. And so as long as we know how to interpret it right, we're basically storing information. That's something that an analog device doesn't do. And so remember, a digital representation means it's expressed in digits. It's able to write stuff down and remember it, recall it later, maybe use it as scratch working memory, or maybe work on large data sets. But this is the can of worms that's opened once we have a circuit like this flip-flop that's able to store data. So take a look at a few seconds of this so you can see this in action.